0200 hours. International waters, Caribbean Sea, 190 nautical miles north of the Venezuelan coast. A go-fast boat, twin outboard engines, fiberglass hull, no running lights, cutting a straight-line course at 50 knots, is carrying 2 tons of cocaine worth $60 million on the open market. The heading is north, the route is direct, the brazenness is deliberate. In the maritime narcotics trade, a straight-line course through monitored waters at night is not recklessness. It is a statement. It means someone with the authority to make interference disappear has been paid to do exactly that. The Cartel de los Soles, the Venezuelan military's institutional drug trafficking network, named for the rank insignia of the generals who run it, has been providing that service for years, routing shipments through a corridor their own radar coverage nominally protects. The protection contract they sold did not include a line item for the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group. 14 nautical miles from the Go-Fast, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter operating without visible lighting placed a single .50 caliber round through the engine block. The boat lost propulsion instantly. The crew was in the water. The $60 million cargo was drifting. Before the U.S. Coast Guard Law Enforcement Detachment could begin its approach to secure evidence and detainees, the radar picture changed. 2 Venezuelan Su-30MK, 2 flanker multi-role fighters, acquired through Russian defense agreements specifically to project sovereignty claims in contested airspace, were airborne from Barquisimeto Air Base and closing at supersonic speed. Their pilots had a clear mandate: establish a deterrent presence, force the American helicopters away from the interdiction site, and allow the Go-Fast crew and cargo to be recovered by Venezuelan naval assets before a formal seizure could be completed. The Venezuelan commanders believed their hand was strong. 2 capable 4th-generation fighters backed by S-300VM air defense batteries positioned along the coast, providing radar coverage and missile support that would make any American attempt to engage the flankers politically and militarily costly. They had rehearsed this scenario. They had rehearsed it against a single Coast Guard cutter with an embarked helicopter. What they were flying toward was 11 warships, 4 submarines, 75 combat aircraft, and 15,000 military personnel organized as Carrier Strike Group 12, the largest American naval force assembled in the Western Hemisphere since the 2003 Iraq campaign. Operation Southern Spear was not a counter-narcotics response. It was the Monroe Doctrine expressed in steel tonnage. To understand why the Pentagon deployed a $13 billion nuclear-powered carrier and its full escort complement to intercept a boat that a single Coast Guard cutter could theoretically have boarded, you need to understand what the Caribbean has become in the past 4 years. Russia delivered S-300VM air defense batteries and Su-30MK, 2 fighters to Caracas, through defense agreements that also included stationing military advisors, personnel whose operational role is to maintain and train on systems that exist for the sole purpose of contesting American air and maritime freedom of movement in a region the Monroe Doctrine has treated as a protected sphere since 1823. Iran transferred Payam-2 class fast attack craft and UAV technology, establishing a forward presence that converts Venezuelan naval bases into potential launch platforms for asymmetric maritime harassment. China's contribution has been less visible: radar infrastructure, surveillance technology, port investment. But the cumulative effect of all 3 is a Venezuelan military establishment that is no longer operating purely on Venezuelan resources or Venezuelan doctrine. The Go-Fast boat carrying cocaine was the visible surface of an arrangement that funds the infrastructure supporting all of it. Interdicting the shipment was enforcement of U.S. law. Deploying the strike group was enforcement of a strategic principle. The Western Hemisphere is not a venue for outside powers to establish military footholds, and the United States retains the will and the capability to make that principle consequential. These Su-30s closed to within engagement range without knowing they were entering a digital environment that had already been shaped against them. Here is the structural vulnerability in Venezuela's approach that their planners understood but could not solve. The S-300VM batteries on the coast and the Su-30Os in the air are capable systems individually. They are not integrated. The ground radar cannot share real-time targeting data with the aircraft at the fidelity and latency required for coordinated engagement against a fully networked adversary. The flanker pilots received their threat picture through their own onboard sensors and whatever voice communication the ground controllers can provide, a fundamentally different architecture than the American system, where every aircraft, every ship, and every sensor is feeding a single unified tactical picture through Link 16 at update rates that make the Venezuelan ground-to-air coordination look like passing notes in class. From the fort's Combat Information Center, the Su-30s were two labeled red icons, moving on a tactical display that also showed every Venezuelan radar emission, every ship in the strike group's sensor envelope, and the complete electronic order of battle of every military asset Venezuela had activated since the go-fast boat stopped transmitting. The flanker pilots were operating on a picture of the engagement that was significantly less complete than the picture being used against them. At 20,000 feet, an EA-18G Growler from Electronic Attack Squadron 133 was already on station. The Growler's next-generation jammer pods cover multiple frequency bands simultaneously and can be directed with a precision that earlier jamming systems could not achieve. When the Su-30S entered the engagement envelope and their pilots activated their N011M bars radar systems for fire control, the Growler's electronic attack created a condition where the radar returns the Venezuelan pilots were seeing bore no reliable relationship to what was actually in the airspace around them. Their radar warning receivers showed threat indications that didn't correspond to actual targeting from American aircraft. Their communication links to the S-300 ground stations degraded into noise. Rodriguez, leading the Su-30 element, had flown this kind of intercept before. He had never flown it inside an electronic environment constructed by a fully staffed electronic attack aircraft with direct data link support from a carrier's entire sensor architecture. The radar picture that had been showing him a workable tactical situation dissolved into clutter. The data link to the ground controllers that would have allowed the S-300 to provide targeting support went silent. Two Su-30 Mk2s, worth approximately $35 million each, were operating as tactically isolated aircraft with no coherent sensor picture in airspace they believed they controlled. The flankers turned back. They had no other viable option. Do you think Venezuela's military planners understood before this engagement that their air defense architecture had this specific integration gap? Or did they discover it in real time? That question matters for what they build next. Leave your read below. The Venezuelan response shifted to the maritime layer, a formation of fast attack craft, Iranian-designed Payam-2 class vessels, small enough to maneuver aggressively in confined waters, armed with anti-ship torpedoes, pushed north from their coastal base toward the interdiction site at high speed. The logic was the same as the Su-30 Gambit. American surface ships would not fire on small Venezuelan naval vessels for fear of triggering an escalation narrative that Caracas could exploit diplomatically. Create enough physical presence around the Go-Fast site, and the Coast Guard boarding team would have to withdraw. The logic did not account for what was operating below the surface. A Virginia-class Block 3 attack submarine had been in position beneath the fast attack formation's approach vector for 6 hours. She had been there before the Go-Fast boat left Venezuelan waters. Her passive sonar had been tracking the Payam-2 hulls since they cleared the harbor entrance. When the Venezuelan fast attack formation crossed the threshold where their torpedo engagement range overlapped with the boarding operations position, the submarine's captain activated the active sonar in a single ping mode. A sonar pulse from a Virginia-class submarine at close range is not a sound. It is a physical event. The pressure wave propagates through the water column and through any hull in its path with enough energy to be felt as vibration in the chest cavity of crew members aboard small craft at distances the civilian concept of nearby does not adequately describe. It communicates one thing with a clarity that requires no translation. There is a nuclear-powered submarine directly beneath you. It has had your formation targeted since before you left port, and you are continuing to exist because a decision has been made to allow that. The Payam-2 formation reversed course. The boats were not damaged, their crews were not injured, and no weapon was used. The sonar pulse was the entire response. With the air and surface interference elements withdrawn, the Coast Guard boarding team completed its approach to the drifting Go-Fast. 2 tons of cocaine were packaged as evidence. 4 traffickers were detained under Maritime Law Enforcement Authority. The operation was documented and logged. Then the strike group did something that required no radio transmission and no formal declaration. It turned on its lights, not navigation lights. The weapons system, illumination that signals active combat readiness. the radar emissions, the electronic warfare suite activations, the fire control system status indicators visible on every other vessel's threat warning equipment within 50 nautical miles. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye's AN/APY-9 radar had been mapping Venezuelan ground assets throughout the engagement. The S-300VM launcher positions that Venezuelan commanders believed were concealed within jungle canopy had been characterized, their GPS coordinates entered into the strike group's targeting system, and that data shared across Link 16 to every ship in the formation. The batteries were not hidden, they were labeled. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyers in the formation carry the AN/SLQ-32 V6 electronic warfare suite, a system capable of generating thousands of false targets on any radar screen foolish enough to activate a fire control mode in its vicinity. The S-300VM batteries on the Venezuelan coast had been operating their search radars throughout the engagement. Every frequency they used, every scan pattern, every handoff protocol between radar and missile had been recorded. If any battery operator had been given an order to attempt a targeting solution on American aircraft, they would have found their radar screens displaying a fleet that bore no geographic relationship to where the ships actually were. Beneath the sea, the Virginia-class submarine was repositioning, somewhere on a new track, tracking new contacts. Its Tomahawk Block 5 cruise missiles targeting systems carrying coordinates for Venezuelan command infrastructure that were being updated in real time from the E-2D's picture overhead. The submarine's new position was unknown to anyone in Caracas. That unknowability is itself the deterrent. You cannot target what you cannot find, and you cannot find it because it does not want to be found. As dawn approached, the strike group began its transit to the next operational area. The Caribbean returned to its normal morning appearance: container traffic, fishing vessels, the routine commerce of a busy maritime region. The go-fast boat was being towed to a port facility. The 2 tons of cocaine were documented and secured. Venezuelan naval assets were back in their bases. Russian and Iranian military advisors in Caracas were writing incident reports. Consider the exchange ratio. The Cartel de los Soles lost a $60 million shipment and several operatives to law enforcement custody. The Maduro regime lost face in a confrontation its own air and naval forces initiated and withdrew from without achieving their objective. Russia's S-300VM system was characterized in an operational electronic environment, and the characterization data now resides in American intelligence databases. Iran's Payam-2 fast attack doctrine was tested against a Virginia-class sonar system and found insufficient. The cost of deploying Carrier Strike Group 12 is substantial. The alternative cost calculation is the relevant one. A minimal response, a single Coast Guard cutter, no strike group, would have produced a Venezuelan tactical success. The interdiction blocked, the shipment recovered, the Su-30S credited with deterring American law enforcement, the S-300VM batteries credited with establishing a no-fly zone over Venezuelan interests. That outcome would have been broadcast, amplified, and used to demonstrate to every government in the region that the American commitment to freedom of navigation and Monroe Doctrine enforcement had conditions, that sufficient local military pressure could make American law enforcement yield. The cascade from that demonstration would not have been contained to the Caribbean. Moscow's military advisory presence in Venezuela represents an investment in establishing a precedent, not a tactical position. A precedent that American power projection yields to regional military pressure in the Western Hemisphere is worth considerably more to Russian strategic interests than the cost of whatever advisors and hardware produced it. The strike group deployment made the opposite precedent, demonstrating that outcome cost money. Allowing the other outcome would have cost credibility, and credibility, once spent in a region, does not replenish on a useful timescale. The Cartel de los Soles will attempt another shipment. The Venezuelan military will calculate whether the next intercept is worth a confrontation with a force that demonstrated, in a single night's operation, that it had characterized their air defense architecture, silenced their fighters electronically, located their submarines before those submarines located anything American, and retained targeting solutions on their command infrastructure throughout. That calculation is the deterrence. The strike group did not win a battle last night. It changed the cost-benefit analysis for every decision Caracas will make in the next 18 months. The question worth considering is the one the Venezuelan generals and their Russian advisors are working through right now. The S-300VM integration gap with the Su-30S is a solvable problem. It requires investment in data link architecture and doctrine revision, both of which Russia's advisors are capable of providing. The fast attack doctrine gap against Virginia-class sonar is harder to solve without a different class of submarine. If Caracas and Moscow identify both gaps and begin closing them, what does the next version of this confrontation look like? And does the Monroe Doctrine hold at higher levels of technical sophistication on the other side? Leave your analysis below.